Now, here's an interesting question. In pre-modern Japan, who could and could not become shogun? What were the requirements or prerequisites for being granted the title of shogun? For several years now, I have had this interesting discussion topic written down on a list. And finally, I think it's time we take a moment here to discuss this question, because, believe it or not, there seems to be a fair bit of misinformation out there regarding the answer. The title of shogun itself has become perhaps as famous today as the samurai themselves. Through books, TV shows, films, and games, anyone with some form of interest in pre-modern Japan or even history in general knows this term. In the simplest of definitions, the term shogun, specifically Sei Taishogun, is a title which granted its bearer command over the warrior class of old Japan. This particular variation and its various adjacent shogun titles were ones originally created out of necessity. They were born during the Yamato Kingdom's war against the northern Emishi. It was here these titles were awarded to significant figures who led campaigns against their enemy. Thus, when translating a term like Sei Taishogun, it literally comes out to mean the great general who subdues the barbarians. They were also not originally hereditary titles, as such a concept would not emerge until Minamoto no Yoritomo, who would ascend to the position in 1192. The most common way we think of the term today is in direct correlation with the shogun's own military government, the bakufu or shogunate, which anyone watching this video is likely aware there were three of over time: the Kamakura shogunate, Ashikaga shogunate, and Tokugawa shogunate, each successively building upon the strengths and weaknesses of what came before. And this is where we should now address potentially the big misconception of who could become shogun. As I'm sure many of you know, there is an idea out there that one needed to have been descended from the Minamoto family, specifically the Seiwa Genji branch, in order to acquire the title. And thus, if one did not bear this lineage, it was simply out of the question that they would ever be considered. The Minamoto were, of course, one of the three mighty families of ancient Japan, alongside the Taira and Fujiwara. But was this rule actually true? Did a leader really need to be able to trace their lineage back to the Minamoto to be granted the position? This is a topic which it appears some historians might be in disagreement on. Now, this idea is certainly one which I have brought up in my earlier videos, and is something even mentioned in plenty of books on the subject. For example, The History of the Samurai by Jonathan Lopez-Vera, and A History of Japan by R.H.P. Mason and J.G. Caiger, two books I use frequently. Both books highlight the topic, with Lopez-Vera in particular stating that the start of the Minamoto-only rule began with that of Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, the third Muromachi shogun. He later addresses Tokugawa Ieyasu's own need to secure a connection between himself and the Minamoto before he took up the title of shogun as well. However, even if this was a rule that Yoshimitsu started, there are various other examples of how this doesn't seem to be a rule that needed to be followed, or that Ieyasu was even trying to follow it. Prior to Yoshimitsu, the title itself had been conferred on a wide range of figures, many of whom were not of the Minamoto family, especially even those who had reigned during the age of the Kamakura Bakufu, a shogunate literally established by the leading member of the Minamoto family. Many shoguns of the Kamakura Bakufu were actually members of the Fujiwara family, or even imperial princes, following the Hojo Regency's takeover of the military government. Thus, there was obviously no belief that the shogun needed to be of the Minamoto family at this point. The Ashikaga shogunate, however, would remain entirely within the Minamoto, and the same can be said for the Tokugawa shogunate. This might seem to add legitimacy to the argument that the shogun needed to remain Minamoto, or at least that Yoshimitsu's edict was strictly followed. What might further seem to add to this belief, at least at face value, is when examining the positions of Japan's three great unifiers, the mighty and influential figures who had pieced the country back together out of the chaos of the Sengoku Jidai. Yet, upon closer examination, the situation gets a bit more tricky. Neither Oda Nobunaga nor Toyotomi Hideyoshi were of the Minamoto, and neither of them would take the title of shogun. This might make it seem like a valid argument in favor of the necessity to bear the Minamoto name, but that is really not the whole story. Let's first take a look at Nobunaga. Why did he never become shogun despite his strong position in charge of Kyoto and much of the central region? Well, originally it was just not an option. Nobunaga's initial march on Kyoto was born out of the ruse that he was doing so at the behest of Ashikaga Yoshiaki. The idea was that he was kicking usurper powers out of the imperial city and making way for the triumphant return of a real shogun, that being Yoshiaki, who would be granted the position of shogun in 1568 following Nobunaga's campaign. It was quickly thereafter, however, that Yoshiaki realized how he was only being used by Nobunaga as a puppet. Thus the two had a swift falling out, followed by Yoshiaki reaching out to various other powerful daimyo in aims of having them come to Kyoto to eliminate Nobunaga. By 1573, Nobunaga was strong enough and his patience with Yoshiaki was evaporated enough to the point where Nobunaga could safely dismantle the shogunate and remove Yoshiaki. Yoshiaki would flee to safety in the west, where he was sheltered and where he would continue to claim he was the legitimate shogun. Indeed, there were even those within the imperial court who believed this, but it really didn't matter anymore. And this is where we reach our first major flaw in the Minamoto-only argument, because apparently there are records which indicate that, likely some point following the removal of Yoshiaki, Nobunaga received an imperial recommendation to become shogun, despite the fact that, as we have already established, he had no connection to the Minamoto. Now, Nobunaga obviously never became shogun, and although it's not entirely clear if he had a personal reason for this, we can probably figure out for ourselves why he might not have cared for the position. Number one is the fact that he had just spent the last several years puppeting a shogun. He knew firsthand how even a leader with that title could be manipulated by a stronger warlord. The title probably just meant nothing to him at that point, and he would want to avoid all connection with a former weak regime. Which then leads into the next fact, that Nobunaga was already just too powerful. He had already come to dominate a large portion of Japan and specifically hold significant positions at court. He just likely saw no logical need to become shogun. And although maybe he would have taken the title at some point in time, his early demise in 1582 ruined that potential. As for his successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, he had his eyes set on another title, that of Kampaku, the imperial regent, a position which, as others have pointed out, can be seen as already superior to that of shogun. Thus, Hideyoshi never needed or cared to be granted the title when he already possessed the power of the Kampaku. It was not until the later rise of Tokugawa Ieyasu that the focus returned back to the title of shogun. Ashikaga Yoshiaki, who had maintained that he was the true shogun throughout the remainder of his life, had died in 1597. Thus, no one challenged Ieyasu when he was granted the position in 1603. Now, the popular story is that Ieyasu might have been planning to become shogun decades before it happened. This is the idea that Ieyasu had changed his name and forged his own connection to the Minamoto as a means of eventually attaining this position. But, once again, a closer examination shows that this likely was not the case. His name change from Matsudaira Motoyasu to later Tokugawa Ieyasu was perhaps more a move to distance himself from his former Imagawa overlords, from whom he had taken the Moto from Imagawa Yoshimoto's name, along with aims to also further legitimize himself as the Lord of Mikawa, at a time when the province itself was in turmoil. Although I would certainly never rule out Ieyasu having the foresight to begin planning his road to becoming shogun this early on, the alternatives just appear more realistic. By 1603, following the death of Yoshiaki, the title had once again emerged as the most logical for Ieyasu to wield. It was one which his two predecessors had decided not to take, thus there was no stigma around it. And it had been 30 years since the fall of the previous shogunate, and thus its shortcomings were distantly out of memory. What's more is that it came with very tangible benefits, such as command over the many samurai houses across the country in the wake of the Warring Age, and the ability to legitimize his power base in Edo as the seat of a new mighty Bakufu which could reign for generations. It just made sense. Now, if anything, the stranglehold of hereditary rule that the Tokugawa shogunate would largely maintain throughout its existence would certainly once again build a solid case that they were aware of the Minamoto-only rule and held true to it. Yet, any family in power would want to ensure that they remain as such. Fathers want their sons and grandsons to rule after them so that their name continues. It's only natural. And if there was a belief among them that they were only able to hold the title of shogun because of their Minamoto bloodline, it would have certainly been a rule that they would want to use in their favor to maintain control. At the end of the day, the concept that one truly had to be of the Minamoto family to become shogun is an idea which historians have come to call into question, not only due to there not being a precedent for it, as showcased through the various non-Minamoto shoguns, but also through the reasonable potential for two of the great unifiers to ascend to the position should they have desired it. Personally, I think the greatest reason why we have come to believe it lies with Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi's dismissal of the title. If either of them had taken it, even briefly, it would have completely destroyed the argument today. But that is not the case, and here we are discussing and even debating it a bit hundreds of years later. In truth, it seems as though one really did not actually need to possess Minamoto lineage. One simply needed to be a powerful enough lord, with influence over the emperor and court to seize the title. Such a figure could have come from any family, and although there might have been a rule established at some point that attempted to keep the position within the Minamoto, it was not a rule that could strictly be followed, especially during a time when a mighty ruler from another family was in control. The picture of history that has been painted, however, is one that has led many of us to believe in one set idea, and it is only through deeper digging that we can uncover the truth. So I hope this helps to answer a question many of you may or may not have been curious about over the years. It certainly is one which I have thought about for some time, and it has only been through talking with knowledgeable individuals and doing some reading on my own that the reality of the situation has become more clear. So, let me know in the comments if you have any other interesting questions you think would make for a great discussion video like this. It would be fun to open up more discussions or even debates on more subjects. But for this one, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most informative.